GCLA TV.
Welcome to GCLA TV. I'd like to introduce you to our panel today, starting with Mark Stewart, GCLA board member and legislative chair, Mo Garkani, the GCLA president, and it's our honor and privilege to introduce California Assembly member, chair of the Latino Caucus, chair of the Assembly Appropriations Committee, and a champion of workers' rights, Assembly member Lorena Gonzalez. Today, our panel discussion for all members of the California chauffeur transportation industry will be to educate everyone on understanding the ballot initiative and the importance of spreading the word to vote no on Prop 22. Assembly member, can I ask you to please explain how we got to this point with Prop 22?
Well, we got here because, quite frankly, we know that Uber and Lyft and other TNCs came into the market totally unregulated. They didn't abide by our existing structure, CPUC. They didn't abide by basic labor protections. And for about a decade, they operated in a way which really left consumers and workers, drivers, in a precarious position. And so in April of 2018, the Supreme Court, in a bipartisan unanimous decision, in that they said, enough is enough with all these lawsuits. Misclassification is clearly a problem. We're going to make it simple. If you're doing the work of a company in that company's primary work and you're under the control and direction of that company, you're their employee and you need to be treated as their employee. So we took that decision and created a bill called AB 5, which made it through the legislature and was signed by the governor last year. And that was broad, and it dealt with a lot of different subjects through it. We try to back out some of those industries that really are traditional independent contractors, people who really operate as their own individual small business. But in that, the rideshare drivers, the rideshare operators, basically, and delivery drivers don't want to abide by basic labor protections. So they put onto the ballot Proposition 22 in an unprecedented way. They are spending $185 million. That is more, just to put it in perspective, than any initiative campaign ever in the history of the United States. It's about a quarter of what President Obama spent for his reelection nationally. And they're spending in California to exempt themselves from these basic provisions, to try to say that they're somehow different, that they're disrupting the way we do business and leaving others in a position where they have to abide by the law. So we're trying to fight back on that and say no on Prop 22.
Assembly member, can you let us know, the industry and our audience today, who's made up of the Yes on 22 campaign and which coalition groups are made up on the No on 22 campaign?
So it's pretty split. The Yes on Prop 22 are the companies that are becoming billionaire companies off the backs of both drivers and riders. Uber, Lyft, Postmates, DoorDash, Instacart. Those are the companies that are spending the $182 million. They've given money and are supported then by the Republican Party. They've given about $2 million to that. On the other side is the Democratic Party. Nearly every statewide elected official, every Democrat who ran for president, including Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, if you will, I think statewide elected official who's taken a position is no on Prop 22. All the unions, Teamsters, SEIU, the Labor Fed, people who work really hard for the rights of workers have been opposed to it.
I know there's a big question out there. We've seen in all their advertising, that they're independent contractors. I know in the two bills that were passed, authored by you, AB 5 and also 2257, really spelled out who was an actual independent contractor and who are the employees. Can you sort of address this back to the question, are there really the rideshare drivers independent contractors, and what is really the makeup of a true independent contractor?
So that's a great question. A true independent contractor is somebody who is acting as their own small business. If these rideshare drivers really had and were able to operate their own taxi-like cab, if you will, if they were able to set their own rates, which even taxis can't do in California, if they were able to negotiate with the customer and on their own terms, have the hours set, their hours set by the customer or with the customer in kind of a contract situation. If they were paying their own workers' comp insurance, if they were fully insured and regulated, then they would be an independent contractor. Of course, one of the strangest things I think about this entire discussion is in California, you couldn't truly operate as an individual driver in that fashion without being regulated by the PUC. So it is amazing, you know, in other states they have things they much more frequently they go after, such as gypsy cabs, you know, and that's basically what we've allowed here. The PUC, the CPUC has allowed Uber and Lyft to kind of operate in this space that would never be allowed for individual drivers, at the same time as not adding the protections for the rider and for constituents, other people who are on the roads, that we would require of a regulated taxi or livery type driver.
So you mentioned earlier, you know, that they're up to 185 million in spend, you know, the most expensive proposition in U.S. history. So, you know, a lot of the comments that we're getting or questions from our industry is, you know, where are the no advertisements? And we know that there's some strategy to this, but it's interesting this past week, two sort of big developments. One was the UC Berkeley Institute study poll that I think that if it's going to give us any kind of optimism, really made us feel really well. I was going to have you address that. And then the other one, which I thought was a really great article, was the endorsement by the Los Angeles Times, No on 22. So if you could address those two.
Yeah, I mean, early on, obviously it feels overwhelming, right? Every time you turn on the television, every time you put on your computer, there's an ad by one of these companies. But California voters aren't dumb. And when they realize that it's Uber and Lyft paying for these advertisements to exempt themselves out of basic labor protections, not just labor protections, but also regulations at the local and state level, people start to get a little suspicious. And so we were happy to see the poll results that despite spending, they've already spent over $100 million, and they're polling at about 39%. That's not a good place to be in. The No campaign, of course, has raised far less. I mean, it's not driven by corporations, it's driven by workers and unions. Hopefully we'll spend, you know, $8 to $10 million in these next few weeks before we get ballots to really drive home the message of who is putting this proposition out there. It's Uber and Lyft and Postmates. And I think that you see by the amount of money that continues to grow, in fact, by these companies, that they're in a little bit of a desperate situation. But we need to keep asking people is why would anybody spend $180 million to not pay their workers minimum wage? There's something wrong there. And there's a precedent there that we just can't accept from big corporations.
Okay, my turn. So the CEO of Uber and Lyft, you know, on September 4th, they implemented that they will have the drivers be as employees if they lose the appeal board and the initiative ballot. Do you think the appeal board is going to wait till the election time before they announce their decision, or do you think they're going to announce it before the election?
You know, it's unclear. I got to hand it to the district court judge who was very strong and issued the injunction in the first place. We've never seen a judge stand up that way. You know, for 10 years, Uber and Lyft have never won a lawsuit, and yet somehow they continue to just keep pushing it down the road, you know, and waiting for a decision. I don't know that we'll get a final decision from the appeals court prior to the election, but I think the court has been very clear. There is no ambiguity in the law. We were very, if there was before, and I don't think there was, if there was before that they could make these arguments that somehow under the previous standard, these could be independent contractors, maybe that was up for grabs. When we wrote AB 5, it became clear, and every court has decided in the favor of the state. Yes, they have determined that you are supposed to function in this way, Uber and Lyft. You need to start doing that. And we finally had a district court judge who said, no, you have to do it in the next 10 days. Of course, on appeal, it got stayed. But I think you will see very quick action right around the time of the election, if not right after the election, to force these companies to do the right thing.
As much as we've been fighting for this for so many years, what happened if this 22 passes?
Well, the fight's never over, let me tell you. I mean, it is just not okay to have multiple standards, and I'm not willing to give in. This is not how we can see the future of work, the future of workers. It is not fair what has been done to different industries who have followed the rules for so long and see themselves decimated by companies that come in and just violate the law. So I'm not willing to say, even if they do win on November 3rd, which let's hope they don't, let's do everything we can to make sure that they don't. But if they do, the fight's not over. We've got to continue to figure out how, in different approaches legislatively and legally, how to push this back. Hopefully we'll have a president who also believes that we have to restructure independent contractor laws. You know, that's been made a big deal of. We've got to change the labor board at the federal level. But I think here in California, you know, people have finally woken up, and we saw, you know, for years, unfortunately, inaction at the CPUC. And in the last few months, we've seen them start to move and start to try to enforce provisions like workers' compensation. So I think we have now government and an electorate who understands something's not right here and that we need to do something. So I think we got to do everything we can to defeat Proposition 22, but if it should pass, we have to regroup and figure out how we move forward.
Assembly member, the most important message after hearing the discussion is the entire California chauffeur transportation industry needs to make a statement to Uber and Lyft by getting out the message to everyone and to vote no on Prop 22. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this is important. This is a David and Goliath kind of fight, right? I mean, it is really these billion-dollar corporations against small mom and pops, like part of your association, right? People who have abided by the law. People who, if Uber and Lyft pull out, will be stuck with their unemployment insurance fund payments because they'll never have to pay in. We have to tell our friends and family. We have to post it on social media. We have to make sure everybody understands what's at stake here and spread the word no on Prop 22.
I'd like to thank our panel and esteemed guest, Assemblymember Lorena Gonzalez. And I hope the California chauffeur ground transportation industry has a better idea of what's at stake in defeating Prop 22 and providing the basic worker rights for all. Thank you. This edition of GCLA TV was brought to you by Century Business Solutions, your credit card processor of choice.